I'm going to direct you to the screen. Anyone, they all have the same picture on them. Note what is still standing at this point in this structure's demise. The wood products that were holding the structure up. Wood is not the problem when we come to building construction. So don't let anybody tell you that wood is not the way we should be building structures in the future. And you'll get a little perspective from me on that going forward. But the structure, whether it's a house or otherwise, very much should be reliant on wood. It is the most environmentally sensitive product that we have in our buildings. So keep that in mind. I don't want anybody to think we should be building out of steel, which has a giant carbon footprint. Concrete, even bigger carbon footprint. We need wood. Sorry, I just had to get on that soapbox for a second. I am a forester. So, who is Thom? And the reason I'm going to kind of give you an idea of who I am is I haven't been in this job for very long and haven't met most of you. And I think it's appropriate for you as you either report or talk about CAL FIRE and the CAL FIRE chief and director that you know who he is. And so Thom Porter grew up in Southern California. I am a born and raised Californian and grew up in a little town called Julian in San Diego. It is a little forest town. Gold mining was its start, much like Nevada City, Grass Valley area, and most of the foothills of the Sierras. And I didn't know what I was going to do when I grew up. So off to school I go. Forestry, that sounds interesting. That's kind of like what I grew up with, being outside. So forestry, I'll do that. Well, I did get a degree in forestry from Berkeley and immediately went to the state of Washington, where I spent my first summer as a forestry technician, dirt forester as we call ourselves, looking at planting, how planting projects had what the success rate of planting projects was on very large clear cuts. Very large clear cuts. I saw things that I only dreamt about or saw in books before. And so I had a perspective of that coming from California that was much different than my coworkers in Washington. And I'm not going to go into any depth there, but suffice to say, California really did make me concerned about what I saw in Washington State. Moving back to California to pursue my professional forestry career and become an RPF is what I did shortly thereafter. I was only in Washington for about 3 years. Came back and I was in Nevada City, Grass Valley, and working again as a dirt forester, working toward my license, which I got, and writing timber harvest plans. So what's this all have to do with CAL FIRE? Well, hopefully you know CAL FIRE, Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. The forestry part, we regulate all timber harvest on private lands throughout the state. And the Forest Practice Act and the implementation of the act is under the Board of Forestry, but the enforcement and compliance with all of the rules comes to me in this job. And I am responsible for that. And so being a forester is very important in this job, as it is being the fire chief for the state. And following that role in a joint fashion is very important to wildland fire in California, because we really are the bridge between what we traditionally call forest fires, or what would happen out on the national forest lands, the federal lands, and then the more municipal kind of cities and local government led areas. And so we kind of have a foot in both of these places. And uniquely, CAL FIRE sits there in that balancing act, and brokers in a lot of cases both the response, but also who's paying for what on these fires. Is it a local responsibility, local borne cost? Is it a federal responsibility, federal borne cost? Or is it the state? And where does the state kind of fit in all of that? So that is kind of where I come to this place from, and kind of more of a maybe holistic approach that I have coming into this job that is not different than the past, but it's maybe it's on Front Street. That is where I have to be constantly. And I believe the expectations that were clearly expressed to me when I took this job, when Governor Newsom called me and said, this is what I'd like you to do. So what we've seen in the past 15 years, I'm going to say, is a distinct progression in fire activity, in size, scope, damage from fires. And the last panel covered that a bit. It's really increased in the last 5 years. But 15 years ago, a couple of us in the room were on the hillsides of Southern California in some place, whether it was San Bernardino County, LA, San Diego, Cedar Fire. That was what we were doing. And we were seeing the same kind of effects that we're seeing throughout the state now. It's fairly localized, Southern California, but it was very much similar to what's going on. And so we started talking about normal is not normal anymore. Seasons are getting longer. Fire season, I'll call it. It's getting longer. It's approximately a month longer on either end of the season at this point. 70 plus days, either end. And so we started talking about, well, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do? So as a fire department, we started year-round staffing. Year-round staffing for the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, CAL FIRE, didn't happen before about 2005. And it was because of things like the Cedar Fire in San Diego and the old fire in San Bernardino and Grand Prix, same place. And that was a change. We were staffing fire engines year-round. Fast forward, we get into the 2007, which we've got the Harris Fire. We've got other fires happening, again, in Southern California, burning homes, killing people, and real wake-up call. It's not over yet. And oh, by the way, Cedar Fire was started by a single hunter who lit a fire because he was lost and it was getting dark. Witch, Wajito, Harris, SDG&E. That was the start of the utility mass conflagration fires that we started to see in California, 2007. And so a lot of things were happening down there. And as a forester, I got to be a part of the response, the recovery, and then determining what we needed to do locally to move forward, have a better system in the future. I worked directly with SDG&E during that time to figure out how they could better be prepared to not have those things happen again in the first place, but also respond as a utility to the needs of the people. And so a lot of what we're doing now is, it feels like I've been here before. And I've been here before in a different place, meaning very local. San Diego Gas and Electric, of course, is just in San Diego, a little bit of Riverside and Orange counties and Imperial. But now, looking at this statewide perspective, it feels like deja vu on steroids. And what I've seen all the way along is the impacts to the public, but also to the responders. Responders are getting much more exposure to very significant trauma than ever before. It is happening so regularly that numbness is occurring, and numbness that is taking a toll on the health of our responders. And we're having increasingly difficult time finding new people to come into this profession that are interested in what this profession has become. We can find plenty that are interested in service, but we're finding it difficult to find enough of those individuals who are really interested in dedicating their lives to what we do. And sometimes for weeks at a time without being able to go home. And so these are the things that are kind of shifting over the last 10 years now, I'll say. And so I say that because it's important for you also to understand that everything that I do, and while I'm in this uniform and wearing this collar brass and talking with the legislature and governor's office about what we need are more of what I just said is a limited resource. And so I'm working very diligently to find ways to increase the numbers, because the only way to reduce the stress and increase the resilience of our human resource is to have more of us. And so that's where you will hear me talk a lot of times. So again, how does this all come together? And what does this have to do with what just happened in the last month? Well, a lot of this has to do with what I expected to speak with you about a month ago or so when I agreed to speak, and some things have changed. We started out when I was preparing for this in a very, very, very slow season. We only had one incident management team deployment, which I can't remember the last year we only had one, and so late in the year. And that was at Red Bank. That was out in the back country, Tehama County. And so what has happened now is we've seen fire season caught up with us. Been talking about it all summer long. We had a slow start. That was due to the rain and the moisture we got and snow in the high country, and the relatively moderate conditions all summer long. Come forward to the last few weeks, the winds came back. And the winds that are coming back earlier and more ferocious than we typically would expect. Definitely a change in our climate. This is something that we're seeing more frequently and will continue to see more frequently, regardless of whether we have damp winters or not. We're still in a place where these winds will happen. And it's just physics. It's just plain physics. When you have a great basin like we do on the backside of the mountains to the east, and you've got an ocean to the west, there are going to be times when there is a flow of air over the mountains to the ocean. Just the way, that's where we are, what we're going to deal with forever. And so we are seeing a time when those events are likely to increase. And so we're going to see more of these wind events, and the wind events are the things that keep me up at night. Because as you've seen, we've had fires. We've had lots of fires this summer, well over 5,000 fires. And we can probably count on 2 hands, maybe 3 hands, the number of fires that actually are newsworthy fires out of 5,000. And so what that means is that the weather matters. There are times and places where we're going to lose control of the situation. Too many starts, lightning busts across a dry landscape. Or just plain fires starting in really difficult places. But wind changes everything. And so with this expected increase in winds, we are going to continue to see difficult conditions. This is exacerbated by duration or long duration drought conditions as well. So one of the reasons this early summer we had a few wind events, but we didn't see fires grow and get crazy out of control is because finally some of our heavy fuel component in the dead fuel component on the landscape finally soaked up enough moisture that it didn't just go up and smoke immediately. That was not the case last year. And so a year ago, Friday, day after tomorrow, when the campfire broke, everything on the landscape, doesn't matter if it was a log this big around or a blade of grass or a blanket of needles that had come off the pine forest, mostly the night before this fire happened, all of it was available. Structures too. That's fuel. It dries out just the same. Long drought, very dry house, very ignitable house. Ambient relative humidity for a long period of time and cool, damp conditions also affects the fuel that is a house. So all of those things just kind of came to a head in the campfire. Fast forward this year, a little bit different. We had conditions that were damp through most of the last kind of winter period into late into the spring, which did kind of help with that fuel moisture that I was talking about. But then we also had some other conditions that helped with what's happened in the last few weeks. We had firefighters that had been rested and were hungry to work, truly hungry to work. I finally, about middle of August, heard the first complaints that they weren't getting enough fires. And so then you know you're in good shape. If you don't get enough, if you got folks chomping at the bit to go to fires, you know you're in a good place. And that's firefighters anyway. The rest of us are like, let's just keep it that way. But so we aggressive initial attack. We had all of the focus of the nation really, as far as resources available to us. Basically all of the air tankers, helicopters, all that stuff's been at our disposal. Because most of the rest of the U.S. has been in a similar very low fire severity or intensity. And so we've been lucky. We've been lucky. We've had the right resources at the right time to really make a very big impact and keep fires small. And well, I also am very interested in more fire on the landscape in a planned and environmentally sensitive manner. Prescribed fire. In some cases, I can't agree more with the Forest Service than for some of their practices of allowing fires to burn naturally on the landscape. But I don't have that opportunity. The fires that we are responsible for are starting on private lands. And I can only make one assumption, and that is that that landowner doesn't want his or her property to burn. And so we go after every fire and we try to knock it down, put it out before it becomes 10 acres or more. And we do that 95% of the time. 95% plus of all fires that start in state responsibility area are put out before they're 10 acres. And you never hear about them. And so that's what we strive to do, and that's what we do. And we've been able to be very successful at that, even during times of these wind events, but then there are those ones that get away, the 5% or some percent of the 5%. And we saw that happen. Season woke up on us in great fashion this last month. And I've spent time explaining to the leaders that I'm working with that this is still not bad. What we've seen in the last month is not bad. It's elevated, it's concerning, but we aren't stretched like we've been the last several years, where we've got major fires going north and south. We've had fires going north and south. So we've had 3 team deployments, incident management team deployments this year. 2 of them in the last 2 weeks. 1 to the Kincaid, bona fide, needed. 1 to Maria down in Ventura, bona fide, needed. But nothing like a Camp and a Woolsey. Not to mention the numerous other fires that have happened. And we've had 3 to 4 teams out at the same time routinely for the last several years. And they are very capable of managing the most complex incidents that you can imagine. Camp Fire was one of those. Bulldozers pushing cars out of the way, burning cars in order to get evacuees down a road. That's crazy stuff, and not something that we train for. It's just something that happens and is part of kind of what the complexity that we're working with is. So moving forward, I said I would talk about the kind of other successes. We saw something that happened on the Kincaid fire that turned a lot of heads early on. Had people wondering why. And even myself, I was kind of like, is that the right decision? And that was early evacuations that covered a gigantic area all the way to Bodega Bay. And watching the fire, knowing that it was going to come south and cross 180 or 128 in the Alexander Valley, and then burn down toward Windsor, North Santa Rosa, and then kind of at Healdsburg from the glancing blow. I was just looking at that. I just couldn't imagine that it was going to actually cross 101 and head toward Bodega Bay. It just didn't make sense to me. But that was my initial response. Overlay fire activity, both what it's been in the last couple of years, but also what it can be in those dry conditions. And when wind shifts just by a little bit, what can happen to funnel wind down a canyon, Russian River, down that canyon toward the beach. I understood why. And then add the layer on top of that, public safety power shutdown, and knowing that everybody in that entire area was not going to have any lights unless they had a generator. Wasn't going to have landline phones. A lot of cell sites weren't going to work, or they don't work out there anyway. And night's falling in 3 hours. And when is this fire going to come across 128? It's going to come across sometime between 10 o'clock and midnight. And then it's going to be off to the races because there's nothing stopping it with 60 to 80 mile an hour winds going south. So, good idea. So, play it forward. Was it the right decision? I say adamantly yes at this point. It was a lot of people affected. And I'm going to give you the example that this is just something that it's anecdotal, but it's also from my experience. By not having those people to worry about, firefighters definitely saved way more structures and property than they ever could have otherwise. You will remember the reports, more of the tapes of what was happening in the camp, what was happening in the tubs. What were dispatchers saying? And it's not a dispatcher's decision, by the way, to say this over the air. But what were they saying? Just get people out of the way. Don't even bother trying to fight the fire. And that's the way it is when these things happen. It is get people out of the way. Kincaid is a success for all of the damage and destruction and the lives that are turned upside down from the loss that did occur. And I can't say enough that did happen out there. There are way fewer of those than there would have been had we had people still in their homes when that fire ran through on the second and third nights. So, framing up evacuation, while it is a painful thing to go through, it is a very helpful thing for the emergency response, and it will likely give the best possible chance of saving as many homes, businesses, infrastructure as we possibly can, because firefighters then can do what firefighters do best. So that's kind of, I wanted to pivot to that because it is really something that we saw a great benefit from that we haven't been able to really articulate or show in recent past, because we've been having all these fires starting in the middle of the night, early in the morning, moving so fast that you can't get people out of the way fast enough. But it is something that we need to identify when we have the opportunity, and that is what I have done here. So where are we going forward? So I kind of gloom and doom a little bit, but as previous panel members kind of pointed to, and as a forester, I'm looking 50 to 100 years out. That's, I can't do a whole lot about today, tomorrow, got to react. Next year, react. But looking down the road, I think we are at a unique time where the critical mass, particularly in California, but the critical mass of people that are working in this space are absolutely understand that the climate is changing, and we have to adapt in order to survive in this changing climate. And with that, there is a great resolve to do things all the way across the board. All of the above approach: forest health management, fuel reduction, in between, defensible space around structures, hardening of structures, land use planning, and building materials and building standards that have structures that are more likely to survive in the event of wildfire. All of these things together, and then the people who are either developing those codes and ordinances or responding to the incidents that are occurring, or responding and developing better ways to, after we go through a redevelopment or recovery phase, take the knowledge and experience that we have from that and the data that we have from that to look at a better method going forward, and then applying some of those mitigation fees, as Director Ghilarducci was talking about, to do some of that going forward. It's an exciting time. It's a very exciting time, because a lot of things that have been kind of just in concept and little alcoves or enclaves of people talking about things that are important to them are all coming together. And I'm a lifelong Californian. I have 2 sons, and they are, I believe, going to be lifelong Californians. And my mission is to make sure that they have all of the opportunity to be a part of the natural environment and to enjoy all that we have been able to enjoy along with their kids. And so I am very optimistic that we can leave California in a better position than we found it, because I think we've found it in a very precarious situation, and there is a strategic alignment, government to local, and all of us in between that are committed to doing just so. And that is the end of my comments. And so thank you. And I'm open for questions if there's time. I kind of went long. So.
We do have a little bit of time for questions. Do we have anyone? Oh, I see some hands. So let me just get over here. I think this is the first hand I saw.
Chief Porter, thank you for being here. John Anderson with Humboldt and Mendocino Redwood Company. The goal of the state is to treat 500,000 acres a year, and we've got a long ways to go in that regard. How can companies such as ourselves and the California Forestry Association help the state achieve that goal?
That is a great question, and one that I'm working hard with Secretary Crowfoot and the administration on how we continue to increase. So where we are annually is approximately 250 plus thousand acres on the state responsibility area. So what we're in control of. The Forest Service is doing a little better. They're also trying to get to 500,000 for a total of 1 million acres across California landscape annually. But what we need to do is really harness the small, non-industrial landowner. Better engage with small forest landowners in forest management activities and resilient forest management activities, no matter what their interest is in that land, whether they're trying to produce timber products or they want it for other uses. There are fuel reduction and treatments that we need to be able to encourage across the landscape. Otherwise, we're going to have additional areas where, like the Southern Sierra, we have massive die-off of timber, and then you're kind of starting from a really bad place. And so increasing resilience through forest treatment and encouraging that on small landowners, but also working with ranchers and some of the oak woodland kind of owners for that same type of programmatic work. And then Also, at the same time, leveraging our relationship, which is very good with the federal land management agencies, Forest Service in particular, they're the largest, to increase the ability for long-term kind of investment in infrastructure for whether it's biomass or small wood processing or other kind of manufacturing capabilities to utilize some of that, what we would consider to be waste or fuel type wood product, into something that's actually useful and continues to sequester that carbon. So all of these things are part of the picture, and I think in the near future, we're working through some MOUs and things that I think will point toward some long-term investment capabilities in that space, which will hopefully fuel that work that needs to be done to get to that 500,000 acres. Thanks, John.
Hi, Chief Megan Murray, Senator Jerry Hill's office. Thank you so much for all the work you guys have done. And you kind of alluded to it, the rise of the PSPS events and how devastating this is on our communities, and working directly with these communities that have been affected like week after week. It's just been very challenging. And then also the doing evacuations beforehand, and how that's kind of similar. You're kind of, saving something before it gets devastating. And we've had folks like, is this the new normal? Is my power going to be shut off every week? What about evacuations now? And are we going to see is this the new normal? We're going to be preemptively evacuating folks? Or how do we kind of make sure that line that we walk?
That's great. And you get to hear it even more than I do, I'm sure, from constituents up through Senator Hill's office. And so it would have been nice to have Mark Ghilarducci here with me, because we do respond to this jointly. And so being a responder, I'm kind of in the front end, Mark's more on the back end, and kind of making sure the systems are in place and the resilience of all of that are taken care of. But what's important is knowing that we are very much lockstep and working on these issues together. Going forward, I don't have that crystal ball, but I would say in the near term, it's going to be more PSPs, and it's going to be more evacuations that are maybe bigger than they need to be artificially. But I think in the mid to long term, we're going to get past that. We're going to have a smarter grid. We're going to have through the Public Utilities Commission, but also through work that we're all doing collaboratively, we're going to see more high sensitive area undergrounding of power lines, or hardening of the infrastructure, more microgrid solutions, more all those things we're hearing. I think that's all reality. It's just not reality in the next year or two. It's going to be out there a little ways. And then in that optimistic, better than we found it future that I was talking about, when I step out of this role and I'm with my grandkids out in the woods, I expect that we're going to be in a much better place in all of this. But utilities are one spark. There are thousands of ways a fire can start on the landscape. So we have to be vigilant and continue to build our knowledge of how to take care of those situations too.
So Chief, first I just want to say, on behalf of all of my friends who live in all of these very vulnerable communities, thank you very much to all the firefighters. We're really glad they retired in August, because we certainly worked them the last little bit, and we really appreciate that. I have a question about, you touched on it briefly, but just to go back to the prescribed burn process, kind of what do you see, where do you see that fitting into the overall strategy? And I know that there's always an issue about how to take care of large tracts of land. Do you do logging? Do you look at the biomass issues and then the prescribed burn issues. Can you talk a little bit about that mix a little bit?
Thank you for the question. And related to prescribed fire, that is a huge, it's a huge benefit that we're moving back toward the use of fire on the landscape. California is a fire-prone and fire-adapted place. And so going back to a management tool that was used for thousands of years before settlers showed up here, I think is the right thing to do. We are in an unfortunate place where there are a lot of locations we'd like to see fire back on the landscape that we can't get it there safely yet. So we're going to have to do some of these other types of projects. And what I'd like to say is, well, if you look at the landscape, over time, I would imagine we're going to increase the amount of prescribed fire on the landscape, and then you'll see a reduction in the amount of other types of fuel treatment. If you just stay with the 500,000, I mean, I might be talking decades out. Remember, I'm a forester. I'm thinking 50, 100 years. At some point, most of those acres are probably going to be treated by means of use of fire. And so how do we get there is kind of the what we're looking at now. And I think there are places where we can reintroduce fire on the landscape that will take more work or less work. And we're going to have to just kind of build toward that capacity. And then other types of treatments, I think related to kind of the forestry or the wood as a product, wood that I believe is our best building material. California is very much in a place where worldwide we're renowned for how well we protect the ground that is producing forest, is a producing forest, and the forests that are there. And so I would like to see that is recognized and continues, but also we have a capacity to supply more of our own timber needs. California only supplies a very small fraction of the actual use of wood products that we consume. So we're having while we're protecting what's in California, we're also causing the possibility of damage elsewhere. And I'm not going to say that Oregon or Washington is the problem. It's probably far beyond that. But I think we need to look at what the big picture actually is, and also understand that California does produce enough of its own wood products, and probably a lot of it's going to come out of these fuels reduction project work, that small wood kind of utilization that I was mentioning earlier. But we can probably produce most of what we need in California if we buy and certify our own local grown wood products.
All right, Chief Porter, thank you so much. And thank you people for here.